I truly believe that one of the biggest challenges facing any candidate is having credibility. And I believe that we have a credibility issue in our federal government candidates because we've allowed corruption to be rampant in Washington, D.C., and we don't seem to be doing anything about it. The average voter, like you or I, believes there's corruption there. We ask for that corruption to be dealt with, yet it doesn't seem that our representatives in DC want to do anything about it or care to do anything about it. I've come up with a 5-point plan I'm calling the Pukita plan to deal with the corruption in Washington, D.C. It's got 5 points. I don't think that any one point is any more important than any other. I believe that all 5 of them should be implemented to get to the root of corruption. Is this going to eradicate all corruption in Washington, D.C.? I don't think so. I think, like anything else, if there's a place where someone can take advantage and cheat, there are people that will. It just becomes trying to get better and better over time. The first aspect would be term limits. Term limits, I believe, do a couple of things. One, because someone isn't going to be in DC forever, the chance that they're going to be corrupted because they can have an influence for someone who wants to control them is much lower. The second point is that even if someone gets to DC who is corrupt, it's a self-righting mechanism in the sense that they won't be there very long and they'll be gone. So even if they do get to DC and they do commit corrupt acts, they'll only be there for the term limit and then they'll be gone. It's not perfect, but I believe term limits will really have an impact on cutting down on the corruption that we see today in DC. The second aspect that I want to talk about is what I'll call financial hyper-transparency. And what I mean by that is, currently politicians in Congress are required to disclose their holdings, where they get their income from and things of that nature, and their spouse has to do it. But their siblings don't have to do it. Their children don't have to do it. Other members of their extended family don't have to do it. And their friends don't have to do it. And so we've got to find a way to take a broader look at a candidate's relationships and background. Now, I'm not sure I've got a total solution for this, but I do believe that they should have to disclose much, much more about their holdings in terms of trusts and limited partnerships and things like that that might not be asked about on the standard financial disclosure forms. Then I think we need to make politicians in Washington sign a decree that basically says they're not taking money from someone to impact their votes or legislation. They're not participating in helping friends or family benefit from their office. And the penalty for doing so needs to be stiff. When I say stiff, I think it needs to be the highest level of felony possible. And it needs to include jail time with some kind of mandatory minimum. Let's say it's 10 years or 5 years. And we've got to get serious about prosecuting these kind of things and not allowing for plea deals. So we have to make it that if you break any of the laws that get put in place for financial hyper transparency, that you know the penalties are stiff, so there are some significant consequences for bad actions. The third aspect I want to talk about in terms of mitigating corruption in DC is the line item veto. Uh, Line item veto has been talked about for a long time. The pork that we see in legislation is sometimes incredible and unbelievable. You might have a bill that's dealing with highways, and there's some pork in there for the pharmaceutical industry or teachers unions or you name it, totally unrelated to the bill, and obviously a kind of a payoff to someone to get their vote. And while this may not be illegal corruption, it certainly is corruption, and it certainly is a waste of money in terms of the system. And so I think the line item veto is something that needs to be implemented as soon as possible. The fourth aspect of my 5-point plan is to outlaw or criminalize offshore accounts. And what I mean by this is we should make it illegal for Americans to have investment accounts and bank accounts and accounts where they can get paid offshore. Now, there has been some talk about international reporting, but I want to make sure everybody that's viewing this knows that, let's say I have an offshore account in Malta, or in Cyprus, or in Gibraltar, or in the Cayman Islands. I don't have the same kind of reporting on those accounts to the IRS as you would on your accounts that are based in the US with, let's say, your local bank or your brokerage firm. So they're not going to get 1099s or they're not going to get W-2s or anything like that. And it would be easy to just not report income that's sitting in those offshore accounts. And in fact, there's a wide range of estimates, but there are tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of taxes being evaded fraudulently by the non-reporting of income in offshore accounts. They're also a great place for payoffs to take place, not only with the politicians themselves, but their family members, their children, their brothers and sisters, etc. So I think outlawing offshore accounts is an absolute requirement. Now, there'll be an objection saying, well, I want to be able to invest my money. I'm a libertarian. I want to be able to invest my money anywhere. Well, I'm not suggesting that you can't invest your money anywhere, but you've got to do it through an institution in the U.S. that reports to the IRS. I can't think of a single investment vehicle that wouldn't be available in the U.S. And if there are any, if we outlaw offshore accounts, I guarantee you that they will be made available from some financial services company in a very, very short period of time. So I think outlawing offshore accounts is an absolute requirement to help to mitigate corruption in Washington, D.C. Finally, and this is one that's going to be very, very controversial for incumbent politicians, and that is, I believe that we have got to legislate for public-only lobbying. In other words, we need to criminalize any lobbying that takes place behind closed doors. Lobbying needs to be done in a public venue. It needs to be recorded, it needs to be live streamed, and it needs to be made available on the web to anybody who wants to look at it. We need to know as voters what's being said and what's being requested by lobbyists on behalf of businesses, on behalf of industries, on behalf of other countries. We just need to know that. With today's technology, there's no reason why this can't be done. None whatsoever. Um, so I think that that's where we will probably see the most pushback to a plan like this. Politicians who are corrupt loved lobbyists. I believe that if we implemented all five aspects of this plan, that we would virtually eliminate corruption in DC. It's still going to be there. We'd still have to work on it, but this would probably take care of 90 to 95% of it. Now, I would encourage you to ask your representatives in DC how they would feel about a plan like this, because I think that's kind of a litmus test as to whether or not they could be corrupt now or have an intention to be corrupt later. Because there's no reason why anybody who wanted to run a fair game, so to speak, wouldn't be okay with all five of these aspects. So I'd ask you to consider them, and I would really like your feedback on what you think of this plan. Once again, I'm calling it the Pukita plan. It's the five aspects: term limits, financial hypertransparency, line item veto, outlawing offshore accounts, and public-only lobbying. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you viewing this video.